we're creating about as many jobs as those other metros combined.
So Bend hates to be compared to Boulder.
We could have a whole hour conversation about this. I think it sets us up another kind of foundation.
Participating. I think that's the difference between being a citizen or sitting on the sidelines.
These conversations are brought to you by the Ladd Group, Bend's leading real estate team. Help continue this Bend Beat conversation by subscribing, sharing, and leaving us a review. Melanie Kebler, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so we've known each other for a couple years now, or gotten to know each other over a couple years. I think first when you were working on your campaign for the mayor, mayor of the city of Bend, and it's been really fun to observe, that optimistic leadership that you've put forth over the last couple of years, and I thought it would be a fun opportunity to kind of share a little bit about your story, your origin story, your connection with Bend, and then we can start talking about some of the subjects that are either top of mind for either you or what I think is out there in the city.
Sure, great.
Wonderful. So let's start with you. So you were a Lava Bear, right?
Yes.
So you were at Bend High School. How long have you been in Bend, and how long has your family been here in Central Oregon?
Yeah, so my parents moved us here 89, 90, so I was about 4 or 5 when we moved here.
Okay.
Yeah, so came up through the school system, as you mentioned, in Bend High grad.
Yep.
Went off to University of Michigan, actually, for college, so out to the Midwest.
Okay.
Totally missed the mountains and everything. It's
it's
lovely there. It's very flat, so I came back to Portland to actually go to law school, and I went to Lewis and Clark Law School. So I made it back to the Northwest.
Okay.
But my whole family has lived here, for decades, longtime Bend residents, and I kind of knew maybe I'd eventually end up back here, so got a chance to move back in 2018.
Okay.
So that's when I moved back to town and have my daughter here, who I'm raising, and is now going to the same elementary school that I went to, which is cool.
That's too funny. Where's she going?
Bear Creek.
Bear Creek. Yeah. Wonderful. Well, that's. It's funny to kind of see the stories. When I had conversations with a lot of the people that have been in Bend a long time, 40s, 50s, 60s, whatnot. The storyline used to be that everyone would leave Bend, especially in the more troubled economic times. Their kids would leave for education and never come back.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting seeing the full circle where there's the economy and draw to there's that synergy to keep families together here in Central Oregon.
Yeah, I would like everyone who has kiddos raising kids here, those kids should have the opportunity to stay here if they want.
Yeah.
When I was growing up, it was like, oh man, it's so boring here. I gotta go somewhere else. And I think you go other places and realize how special this place is and how great it is to live here. And I think that's part of when you grow up and maybe mature a little bit, go, oh wait, actually that was pretty awesome to grow up in Bend. But I think everyone should have the chance to stay here if they want to. That's part of why I'm in this role, is to help make sure that we're growing in a really smart way and that we have that sense of community and togetherness.
Well, you have that sense of perspective as well. What it looked like before and after and during of all these cycles, I think is important as well. There's always a before and after, of Bend. It's a change that was founded, it was a city that was founded on change,
right,
and has been in, flux and reinvention for a long time. But when you were running for mayor, one of the quotes that I came across this was from 2020. You said, Bend stands today at a major crossroads. Our city faces a period of crucial economic recovery. This is when we really hadn't quite found our footing yet, coming out of the Great Recession, an intense climate crisis, and widespread calls for racial and social justice. So given perspective now, here we are about 3 years after that. How do you feel about that? Are we still at that crossroads? Has it changed?
I feel like we're still there, but I think we're starting to be intentional about where we're going. And that was back in 2020. I was running for council for the first time. And that was a pandemic campaign. So that was a definite time of uncertainty and feeling like we had a lot to figure out going forward after going through this really rough period, right? Yep. So I think we have already taken some great steps and are on the verge of taking some more great steps for some really great planning efforts for our future. Yep. And in the meantime, we've been really working to invest in some of the biggest challenges: homelessness, housing, transportation, to really just get ahead of the ball instead of being behind it, right, when it comes to thinking about our future.
Yeah, I see a lot of things that you guys are tackling are very proactive, and it's not putting out fires. It's trying to put a roadmap forth.
Right.
I'm sure that's challenging. Have you found that the city is supportive of such, monumental tasks, or are they just, wanting you to fix the problem du jour,
I think both. And I think, we have to make sure we're maintaining our basic services, right?
Yeah.
Right. We're keeping our transportation system maintained. We're responding to police and fire calls. And so those basic services always have to be there. And then that's the platform you can work off of to say, okay, let's be thinking about our growth and how we manage, how we use our land and how we build buildings and housing. And I think we have a great staff that does a great job with our basic services. So that gives us that freedom to say, okay, we need to be thinking long-term. We need to be acting now instead of later.
Yeah.
We need to be thinking about how do we have the money and the resources we need for what we know is going to happen. People are going to keep moving here. We're going to keep growing. So I think that's a big point of what we're trying to do on council.
Well, that's interesting. And I'm going to circle back to a little part of that comment about the city staff being great. I'm 100% in agreement with that.
Oh, good.
And when I speak with people from other cities of our size, that's the sentiment is not nearly as supportive as of what we have, and the talent pool and the vision, that unified vision of and purpose for Bend is extremely rare. I think that when I go to a lot of cities that have growth like Bend or even same populations, it's very much us against them, us against the city, developers against the city, them against them, and no one, that common thread seems to have been lost. Maybe it didn't exist, but it seems to have been lost. And when I have discussions with anyone involved in planning or infrastructure, whatnot at the city, unequivocally, everybody seems to be marching in the same direction and very supportive. So, I think that's something that we absolutely have to be grateful for here in Bend. Some of the leaders that we have on staff are absolutely incredible.
Right. Yeah. We're lucky to have a great city manager. He's been here over a decade now.
Yep.
And Air King. And one of his big philosophies that he instills through the government is this idea of continuous improvement. So not just get it done and kind of check the box, but continuously looking, how can we do it better? What are some things we can respond to that we're hearing from the community? And there's things like permitting and other processes that we do hear feedback on, and we can always make those better. And so having that spirit of collaborating with the community instead of, walling off is so important, so that people feel like if there is a problem, they know who to ask and how to get an answer, right? And that someone's going to respond to them.
Yeah, well, wonderful. So, let's talk about some of the bigger issues that you're dealing with today. I'm a little myopic in the sense that, I was born and bred in the housing industry and grew up in construction sites. And I look at the world through the lens of housing and how that has tentacles into all the other things from, the vibrancy of our economy to homelessness to barriers to social equity, all those things, and that's kind of always my starting point. So let's start the conversation there, if you don't mind. How important is housing and housing supply, housing affordability, and what is the city focused on right now?
Yeah, so consistently when we do surveys every couple of years to help us form our goals, and consistently housing affordability is the top issue, right? And that's directly linked to the issue of homelessness as well, right? Where the rents and the housing prices are high, that's where you see the highest rates of homelessness. So it's not surprising that's what we have here. And I think there's this thing called the housing theory of everything. Like you said, everything is linked to it. So small businesses being able to thrive, well, if their workers can't find housing, how are they going to thrive? Having a good healthcare system, if we can't have housing for our nurses and doctors and PAs and everybody else, how are we going to have a good healthcare system? Even racial and social justice, right? How do we make sure everyone has access to a home fairly? And there's a long history, as you know, in zoning and planning of trying to keep certain people out of neighborhoods or to discriminate. So how do we start reversing that pattern? Transportation, how do we build housing in a way that people don't have to drive everywhere for every single thing they need, right? So it's not only is it a top community concern because people feel it every month when they pay the rent or mortgage, but it's a concern across all the sectors that we care about, right, as a government. So it's been one of the top priorities to do what we can. The city, we don't build housing ourselves. We regulate land, we regulate permitting, we have an affordable housing fund, we have other ways that we can help make that housing happen in a way that's best for our city. And so I think that's what we've been really leaning into is a lot of those housing initiatives, and how do we start making sure we build up the housing that we need to meet our demand and make sure we're having all different types of housing to meet everyone's needs.
Well, yeah, and you guys have a challenge in front of you. One, with the Oregon land use laws, prescribe so much on what you can and cannot do as a city, right? But it's a longer term perspective, which while I think it's easy to push back at, and you hear it from some people saying, hey, if they just got out of our way and let us build, 10 miles to the east and subdivisions in all directions, we'd have no housing affordability issues. But there's quality of life issues, there's sustainability issues, et cetera. So there's a lot of yin and yang in what you guys are doing, but I think the way it's playing out and when I look at going forward, it's pretty exciting what's coming down the pipeline as far as kind of the diversity of housing types and the availability.
Right. And Bend is an interesting city because, as we've grown, we've inherited some neighborhoods that have bigger lots and have different transportation schemes, feel a little bit more rural. And then we have some, like the core of our city that is a little more urban and can be much more dense and taller buildings and things like that. And that's the core of Oregon land use, is to have most people live in cities so that we can preserve all the beautiful areas right outside of our city that people love to go and visit. But to do that, you have to have that density and you have to start building up. And I think that's the future of Bend, not skyscrapers, but taller buildings than we have had before in certain places where that makes a lot of sense to create those more dense, walkable neighborhoods. It is exciting to me because there are lots of people that love to live in those type of neighborhoods. We'll still have all of our other neighborhoods as well. But that's sort of the next stage, I think, of our kind of growing up as a city.
Yeah, it seems like the demands that we have in the city for population, we're not going to build our way out of this with 10,000 square foot single family lots.
Right. Yeah.
Nor is it going to create the synergy and body heat and connectivity that that Ben's looking for.
Right. Yeah.
And I'm really excited about that as well, especially with I think a lot of the emphasis is a lot on the Bend Central Redevelopment District. I'm a little scared, and maybe we can talk about that. Maybe you can help assuage those fears a little bit. That inventory is going to be so slow to come. Redeveloping light industrial and mixed use of that area between the Parkway and 3rd Street all the way up to Olney down to Reed Market approximately.
Yeah.
There's so many small in-holdings of buildings and lots that, to conglomerate and go vertical in there is a really heavy lift, on a scale financially that, we haven't seen a lot of here. Historically building has been done in, builders would go buy a couple acres or 10 acres or 15 acres and they have a couple $1 million into that and a couple $1 million in infrastructure, and then they build houses as they go. But when you look at a project like that, these are 30, 40, 50 plus $1 million projects all at once.
Right.
And so these are big bets. And I just, it's going to take a few really coming out of the ground to set the stage and show everyone else that it's successful and it's worth that effort. But I'm a little hesitant to say that inventory is going to come soon enough.
Right.
How do you feel about that?
Yeah, it's a very timely subject because we actually have our multiple unit property tax exemption program, which is on top of the tax increment financing program we already have for the core area, where we have a few projects of that type that are coming in and showing, hey, we need this extra tax exemption to make our project pencil. And those are those big bets. Those are those pioneers that are coming in. And that's what that program was designed to incentivize or to help get off the ground. Are
so
those
is this
first
a TIF
few?
Or,
It's a 10-year property tax exemption as long as you meet the requirements of the program and you provide a couple of public benefits off of the list. It could be LEED certified building, could be open space, could be childcare, could be I think one of the projects is doing a wrapped parking garage, so really nice retail at ground level. That's a benefit for the neighborhood. So if you can show those and you can show in your pro forma that you need this tax exemption to make your project viable, you can meet the requirements of the program. And we have a few of those coming through right now. In our other taxing districts, so the school board, parks, library, county are also part of that program. But that is kind of that final hump to help those projects get built and sort of start tipping, get that catalyzation. The other thing that I think I'm positive and optimistic about is we're looking at relocating our city hall and building a new city hall campus. And so we've been purchasing a couple of lots in that Bend Central area.
Okay, so that's happening.
So we can, there's been a few that
lead with tax dollars.
So that we can come in and hopefully do a public-private partnership and build not just like one little city hall, but a whole campus that's kind of a place for civic engagement and could be catalyzing some other things, retail, arts and culture, whatever else it is we want to create there, as well as to try to get some investment in there and show that we're committed to this area, right, and trying to spur some of that. So there's some good things that are coming, but you've identified the barrier that why haven't we seen all this stuff
yeah,
happen there yet?
yeah.
Well, there's a lot that has
Yeah.
to be taken on as far as risks for someone to go in there. So
Yeah.
we're trying to mitigate that how we can and encourage people to be pioneers and get in there for us.
Okay, so as a lava bear that's been here for a long time, are you excited about how the future, the physical assets and the physical structures of Bend look in the next 10 and 20 years?
Yeah, I think it's an exciting time as far as seeing a lot of positive change in our transportation system. We're trying to do some new things that really help people who are walking, biking, rolling feel safer and have more access in a more connected network. I love that we're a roundabout town, roundabout first for almost all of our intersections. So anytime we're improving intersections on my side of town on the east side, Wilson now has 2 new roundabouts, which are amazing. They're safer and they help traffic flow. So I think there's a lot coming, and the voters also approved the transportation bond in 2020.
Yeah.
And so over the next few years, we'll be continuing to roll out some of those projects, which are really helpful for our system as well. So, and I think thinking about what it could look like down by the box factory and down in the core, and how it can be not just a bare lot or 1-story buildings, but actual vertical places where
Yep.
people are living, and then a lot of cool stuff happening at ground level, business opportunities, childcare, all sorts of other stuff. I think I'm pretty excited about that, and I think that's going to be a great place to live.
Brian Ladd here. I hope you're enjoying the conversation and find this dialogue relevant to really what it means to live and work and play in this amazing community. As Bend's leading real estate team, we take our role seriously in representing both buyers and sellers at the absolute highest standards of our industry. For more information on how we can help, feel free to visit our website at bendpropertysource.com or text LADD1, LADD1 to 88,000.
Well, wonderful. Well, I want to talk about a couple other things. One of them, which you alluded to, the Neighborhood Safe Streets program.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
From what I've seen on paper, it's pretty exciting. I think let's unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, that was started a few years back before I was on council, and the idea was we have different neighborhood districts around the city, and the idea was to go to all those neighborhood districts and say, where do you need a crosswalk,
Yeah.
or a better intersection, or a missing sidewalk, or something that's a problem in your neighborhood.
Yeah.
And that developed a big list of projects. Of course, we didn't have money to do all of them.
Yeah.
So there's a selection process, and we finished the first round of that kind of earlier this year, and we're moving now into the next round of saying, okay, let's go back to that list. Is there anything that needs to be added? But these are things like crossing over to Ponderosa Park off on 15th, or new ADA access ramps, and all that kind of stuff that people will see a real impact on the ground in their neighborhood where they're walking around or driving around every day.
Yep.
And it's nice that it comes from people in neighborhoods saying, here's where I'm experiencing something every day. Can you help fix this? So.
Well, that's exciting. I think it's fun to see that come together. I think that's been a crux. Like you said, you've inherited different eras of development and different levels of infrastructure and densities, that occurred over many decades. And
Right.
to try to put all that together in a safe, comprehensive city that moves
Yeah.
is a big challenge.
Yeah, and it's nice to get people to participate and say,
Yeah.
you tell us,
Yeah.
you're the one walking around your neighborhood.
Yeah.
You know where it feels unsafe, let us know so that we can start to address that.
Well, I think it's exciting, especially on how you're looking for that input. I mean, you have a mobile. You have this mobile party thing.
It's a neighborhood
trailer.
Yeah.
It's a trailer that you go out to engage conversations with different parts of the community. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's. I think we are trying to, and it's been a goal since I came onto council in 2021, to just think about different ways to engage. Okay,
Yeah.
we have like a meeting twice a month. It's at 7 p.m. You can come and give comment. That's really not accessible for most people
Yeah.
that have lives, kids, jobs, right?
Yeah.
You can send us an email. It doesn't feel great. So having this opportunity to actually go out to neighborhoods. So they're already having a neighborhood meeting.
Yep.
Now we're there with the trailer. Now we have a counselor there and we have city staff there, right? Just those small opportunities to just have that interaction with your leaders and your city staff is really just, it's a way to build trust and just help information and help hear what people are concerned about.
Yeah.
And then we tried a new thing with the State of the City address, which is kind of a once a year update from the mayor traditionally. And we did a whole program in Alpenglow Park where we had every city department had a booth and you could walk around and there were games for kids and I gave a little speech and it was all about get to know who works at your city and what they're doing.
Yeah.
And we got a lot of positive feedback around that. So we're trying to do more of that, not just, hey, come visit us at City Hall, but get out in the community where people already are and engage people there.
Yeah, I mean, it's easier to have a connective or connected city that has a lot of ongoing dialogue when we're 20, 30, 40,000 people. And it's a challenge to keep that going now that we're 100,000 plus person city. But I'm glad that the city is fighting to keep that conversation going.
Yeah.
And that, I think that openness and the dialogue and the collaboration has been key to bringing Bend to where it's at. And when we give up on that, I think we become a very different place.
Yeah, I think compared to other cities I've seen or heard about, we have a pretty engaged populace. Like we have kind of a local media market that does a lot of reporting on what's happening in the city, so people get a lot of information. So we want to keep that going. We want people to stay engaged and feel like they can give input, or if they have a problem, they can find out how to fix it, or if they have an idea, they know who to tell it to, right? All of that, so people stay connected with their government.
Yeah, on the small scale, I always fight for that when I see a New York Times in the driveway of my neighbor as opposed to a bulletin. I'm always like, no, you're missing it. There's so much good journalism, so much good discourse happening here. I'm always challenging people to stay involved and be part of it.
Well, and we should feel lucky we still have a local paper. A lot of cities, even cities of our size, don't have one anymore.
Yeah, I was meeting with Heidi Wright the other day because they've had to change their, they're going to mail delivery as opposed to dropping it in driveways. And I was saying, hey, does this really need to happen? Are we losing something here? And, margins of print media delivered to your driveway every day are extremely thin. And they're fighting tooth and nail trying to figure out how to deliver that high quality journalism sustainably.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's something, I see this, our print media as a public service as much as it is a business.
Yeah. When we ask people, how do you get news about the city? It's one of the top places, the bulletin, right? So.
Well, and I think they've done a really good job on reinventing the bulletin after they restructured and local investors came in. What was about the time you came back?
Yeah, that was around 2019, I feel like.
And it had been troubled or whatnot. And it seems like the bulletin with its current leadership is, when I asked Heidi what the role of the bulletin was, I was like, what is your agenda? And she said, our agenda is to be a mirror to the community. And it's like, hey, we're not here to push things, but we're here to reflect back who the city is and what are the conversations that are happening. We're not trying to drive an agenda. We're trying to make people be aware of what's going on.
Right. Yeah.
And I was so excited by that. And it was an interesting take because a lot of other publications seem to have an agenda on what Bend should be. But to go back to a point that you talked about before about one of the focuses is racial and social equity and justice in our city. Let's talk about that a little bit because when we talk about being at a crossroads as a society, I think we're there. If not, we were there a long time ago and we were failing to address it. Why is it important to address that in the city, and what are we working on right now?
Yeah, I think so. Again, campaigning through 2020 when we had the George Floyd protests across the nation, we had local activism groups springing up here. We had our own march through downtown where I participated. Right. There's now a voice and more of a community organization around, hey, we want to see action here. Not just acknowledging there's an issue, which is a very important step one, but actual action on how do we become a safer, more welcoming place? How do we address incidences of bias and discrimination that do happen, right? So there are some structural things we can do as a government, and then there's things that the community needs to participate as well, right? But one of the things we've done is created the Human Rights and Equity Commission that was actually created right before I came into office. And so they have done, that is community members coming together to help us work on issues in this area. And they are helping to advise council and bring forward issues that we should be addressing, right? And I think just thinking about how we go forward as elected leaders in this area and being willing to meet and work with people in the community who are working in this area. I think just also just making sure that we're recognizing Bend is becoming more diverse. It's happening right now. And that we're still not feeling like a safe place for everybody. We've had folks that visit who experience discrimination. We have folks that live here that experience that. And we need to make sure we're improving all of our systems, not just the city, but our schools. How do we respond to that? And how do we keep trying to do better? And how do we make sure people have the resources and the care that they need when those types of things happen. And that's something we're working on as a city, and want to continue to address, because we think it's important for the community, and it's important for our city to be a place where no one's like, well, I'm not going there, I had a bad experience, right?
Yeah.
Or I'm not going to move there because it's not a place where I feel welcome, right? We want people to have that welcoming feel here.
Well, and I think it's an important moment of reflection. It's, when I moved here, I was welcomed with open arms, but in retrospect, I showed up as a white male that grew up in the American West. And I was naive enough to think that everyone had that same sense of place and welcoming. And, shame on me for not being more cognizant of the different perceptions people have when they show up. Do they feel welcome here? Is it accessible through housing, through language, through representation? And I was slow to come to that reality.
Yeah.
And, maybe I can use myself as a case for vulnerability of saying, hey, mea culpa, shame on me for taking so long to really realize the intricacies of like, is this an equitable community for all? And it's not okay to just be, non-racist, but to be anti-racist and welcoming of inclusion versus being proactive, trying to pass the mic and make sure that other people are heard and creating future policy.
Yeah, and I think the other step the city has and can take is just internally in our own organization, right? And I think, again, the city manager has really been good at pushing forward with, making sure we now have a diversity inclusion director, a position that didn't exist a few years ago, right? And a lot of that work is internal with our own departments, making sure people are being trained and are having conversations and are starting to learn and maybe do things differently or think about how their decisions have an equity effect, right? So I think there's the internal work, and then there's the out-facing community work as well. But I think I am optimistic that we'll continue moving in the right direction. There's a lot of very dedicated people, not just in the city, but also in the community, that really want to work to make sure that we are moving in the right direction.
Yeah.
So I think we can get there, but we have to continuously keep doing the work.
Well, I think that's a real case for optimism, that you're willing to handle those challenges. I'm sure that, and a lot of people mistaken that the city does everything, and there's limited budget and your primary focus is on providing water and sewer and roads and police and but the fact that you're trying to be so aware of the social issues surrounded in our city and to drive the dialogue and policy around that is aspirational. So
I mean, and it's tough. We're not always going to get it right. It can be uncomfortable, right? And there is that tension of there's only so much that a city councilor or a mayor can do, so we need that community partnership. But I think what I've heard consistently when running is that people expect that now of leadership in Bend, not just like keep the police and the roads good. Like we want more. We want some other leadership. So I think we're all trying to step up into that role.
Is it sustainable with the funding that you have in place to do all these things at this point?
We try to figure it out, and I think that sometimes we have to say, there's not a budget for XYZ. Is there a partnership we can have? I think on the topic of our leaders, we have a committee that we formed right now to talk about how we compensate our counselors, right? And how do we set that at a level where people feel like they have a lot of time to spend on this work, because that's what the community's demanding now. They want you to show up to things. They want you to be read up on things. They want you to be working with the legislature and other entities, right? So how do we support and make sure that anyone feels like they can take this job, right? And that they don't have to have 2 other part-time jobs that they have to worry about necessarily, that they have enough compensation that they can spend the real work, just being that leader in the community. So that's another thing we're working on this year or this next year.
Well, I would be in full support of that, because we have real issues in an incredibly complex city right now, and we're way beyond the point of being a volunteer or a part-time leadership for what we have going on. I mean, we didn't even start electing mayors until 2018. Your predecessor, right? And I mean, the fact that we had appointed mayors up until 2018 and a volunteer city council or a small stipend was mind-blowing to me.
Most people don't realize that. So it's important to have that just dialogue. And part of it too is, there are folks who are working certain jobs or in certain times of their life, and they say, well, I'd like to do that, but if there's no health insurance and there's no real pay, I can't, right?
Yeah,
And we want
yeah.
those people that are motivated to lead, but just have that barrier. We want to take that barrier away, right? And just get a nice diverse pool of people that want to step up and run for office.
Well, it's exciting. Optimistic, after all the hard work that you've put in over the years from city council through mayor, I know we all have our tough moments. I'm sure we have our sleepless nights and our burnout moments, but are you still optimistic about where we are as a city and where we're going?
Yeah, I've had the chance to meet a lot of different mayors, a lot of different people from different cities this year. Been to a few conferences, and every time I come away feeling pretty good about where we're at.
Yeah.
Right. There's a lot of shared challenges that cities across the nation are facing. Homelessness and housing. Infrastructure, just funding problems, revenue sources. And it seems like we're on the right track for most of those, and we don't have there can be problems of cities that aren't growing. People are leaving, people are moving away. They have, just empty shopping malls with nothing in them. And what do we do about that, right? And so we don't have some of those problems. We have different problems. But I think that we are in a mode of being very proactive and very in a planning mindset. And I think that makes me optimistic that we're thinking about where we're going instead of just reacting, and really trying to make a plan for what we want to look like in 20, 40 years as a city. So that's exciting to me that we have this kind of vision to go towards, and it's a positive vision for me. I mean, growth can be painful, but there's a lot of positives that can come from it too, and a lot of good change. So that's what I like to focus on and think about.
Well, no, there's a lot of great things happening. I'm appreciative of that, and I'm of the same mindset. From the outsider who's just working in private industry, observing from the outside. I'm really excited about where the city's going, and there's very big issues, from the very tangible and visual issues of homelessness and whatnot. But the amount of steps that the city is taking quickly is really reassuring. For those that are not aware of what policies are being enacted by the city, once you do some reading, your fears are put at ease with how much is happening. And what's really exciting for me is seeing the private public collaboration on a lot of those issues. From homeless, from shelter beds to services to
I mean, especially on homelessness, we rely on our service providers because we're not the public health entity for the county is. So we don't do any behavioral health or addiction services or any kind of that stuff. So we need to partner with them or our private service providers. And we're really grateful for those partnerships and that we have strong organizations working in the community to help us get these solutions for folks.
Yeah, it's exciting. One of I guess I'm just trying to kind of figure out what else is rattling around in my head, which is a scary place. One of my fears is where we stand right now with economic vibrancy. And are we being presumptive that it's always going to be there? Because everyone, especially if you've been in Bend for a decade or less, or 15 years or less, it's always been this upward trajectory, whatnot. And it's always been assumed that the economy would always be growing and thriving and there'd be enough jobs for everyone. From what I'm seeing, kind of boots on the ground, is that the tone has changed. I'm seeing less people move here, which is, it has helped. We had an over demand for our housing supply, whatnot. But I'm also hearing it from a lot of business owners of saying, I'm not in growth mode. I can't hire people because they can't find a house, or I don't want to take that risk, or I'm going to probably start a business here, but it may be remote workers elsewhere. It's a very different conversation than what I've been hearing, since 2010.
Right.
And without that economic growth, so many of these other things that we want to do, big, great, diverse things here in the city, don't happen. You go to a city like you were talking about where they have budget issues and they don't have job growth, it's a very different conversation. How does the city have their ear to the ground as far as, supporting the business environment there?
Yeah, that's actually something that's, again, timely because through the next year, we're going to be working on an economic development plan. We have a economic development advisory board that's going to help shepherd that work. And a lot of that is planning for that future. Okay, what do we want to attract here and how are we going to do that? And instead of just sort of being like, well, whoever wants to come, think about it, are we going to really lean into the biotech sector? We've had some great investments in folks coming in from that sector, and those are really nice, good paying jobs, right? So how do we think about what kind of jobs we want to attract and how we get those? And then what are the connections with other issues like housing,
Yeah.
right? And how do we kind of connect those up and make sure that we're not having that as a barrier, or we're doing what we can to reduce that barrier as well, right? So yeah, there's definitely that, and as part of our land use planning too, we have to plan for jobs, right? So we have to do some work on thinking about what kind of jobs are coming, what kind of lands will be needed. One exciting thing that's happening in the next year is we're going to start moving, there's a city-owned Juniper Ridge area, so we're going to start moving those lots out and providing opportunity. Yes, it's coming. It's finally coming. So and so we're going to see some opportunities there for some more development from folks that are looking for that larger lot industrial that actually is connected to our core, because there's some people there that maybe want to get out of the core, right? And that allows for a different development there. But so I think, yes, the answer is there's very specific planning that goes into that idea of not just sort of letting the economy happen, but trying to think about how do we attract the good high-paying jobs we want, how do we provide the land for those, and make sure that's all part of the future planning.
Well, it's exciting, and the amount of things that you guys are working on hurts my head, and I can't believe that you're able to focus on the this level of development for the city and such diverse issues, from homelessness to economic growth. So I appreciate you doing that. As I was researching you last night, I was researching quotes about kind of who you are in the city, and Margaret Mead, I'm not sure if you're familiar with her, but she has a quote that says, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has." And I think it's very appropriate for what you and the other councilors are doing for the city, and I just wanted to give a heartfelt thank you for what you've done.
Well, thank you. Yeah, we're trying to make a positive difference.
Well, you're doing it. You're fighting the good fight, and I appreciate you taking time to share that with our listeners here today.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Brian.
Thanks.